Cool shoes. Sorry, I just noticed the shoes. Those are great. Okay, so I'm curious, as you wade into the world of retail, looking at it through the perspective of privacy, having worked in politics, what applies?
That's an interesting question, and I actually think it almost goes the other direction, where one of the things that we did with technology on the Obama campaign was look around at all these great companies that are doing interesting things with data, interesting things with targeting, really marketing of any sorts, and thought, how do we apply that to the campaign? And so in many ways, political campaigns are usually a little bit behind all the private companies that are doing interesting stuff. With that said, there was all this neat stuff about communities, about how do we get momentum that we saw in the campaign that'd be really great to apply to retail in a really grand way. We did a little bit of threadless with the community.
Yeah, I was going to say you actually had the perfect background if you're talking about that going backwards, because you went from retail to politics, then back to retail.
That's true. That's true. I think that's not a normal path.
No. Okay, so what is from your perspective, what is the state of privacy today? I mean, I feel like you hear these competing ideas that, on the one hand, as I mentioned before, you have so many people so worried about everything that is being shared, that is being accessible, and all the leaks, and all the data breaches. On the other hand, we are in this technological age that you think this is the perfect time to have all these problems because we can solve it.
Well, so on the campaign, they took one look at me and said, "You're going to need some media training." And so during this media training, when I sat there and I learned a thing, which they say, well, if there's a question that you don't want to answer, you say, well, that's a very nuanced topic. So, Chuck, that's a very nuanced topic. I think, and the nuances there are really complicated, and so there isn't really a good answer. And it's not so much that now, because we have technology, that we can actually solve some of these problems, because we've always had technology that scales to the time we're living. And so I think it's only going to get worse, so to speak, with technology. What I do think is interesting right now is we have a lot of applications, a lot of differences in age or accessibility or just generally, we have some weird shit on the internet, I think is really how you could probably say it. And we have
that media training really paid off.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, that's a technical term. I think you could probably look it up.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I have a lot more technical terms we can go through later. But, I mean, really, if you look at this is what I like to look at. Sometimes I look at what children are looking at. I look at what teenagers are looking at. And I look at what adults are looking at. And I have no idea what's happening. Does this happen to anyone? Like, you look at the internet and you look at, like, what your friend who's 14 is looking at, and you're like, what is going on? Okay, everyone's hand should be up because those 14-year-olds are looking at some weird stuff. But I think the thing is we can't use, I think this is what my challenge is, as someone, I'm 35, or 36, I guess, I can't use my background to apply towards what youth or what they're doing. Like, I can't use how I grew up, where I'm from.
Because they've grown up in a different technological period, really.
It's
that doesn't apply to your experience or my experience.
Yeah, so we had an intern at Modest who was 18. His entire life that he remembers, he's largely had a camera on a device. That's weird.
Right.
That's a strange thing. So pictures are taken of everything. The number of pictures he has versus the number of pictures I have from when I was 15 is very different.
Right.
And I think that lends itself to all these various interesting positions that you can find yourself in as a 15-year-old, as an 18-year-old. And I mean, I never thought of taking a naked picture of myself when I was 15. This seems to be a new thing that people are doing.
Well, you had to go to, like Kodak.
Well, that's the thing. You had to go.
You had to literally go there and show up and sheepishly wait for your film back. But if you read right
now about privacy, specifically around Snapchat gets hacked, right. All these various things, a lot of this is around the sharing of nude photos. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I think this is a lot because we have cameras on everything. And I think that this has probably happened before, but just not at this scale. And so right. I think I don't know. So
is there just a generational divide in terms of how we perceive privacy? I mean, obviously it's very subjective. One person's privacy is another person's, protection or something. But I'm curious whether a younger generation that grows up sharing everything, they don't see it as a problem. They don't think there's a privacy problem. Is that because of the tech saturation, or because they're 14 and they haven't had to apply for jobs and be haunted by stuff they did online popping up and hurting them?
I'm not sure, but I think we can do a quick test. How many in the audience are under 25? Okay, we got a good amount. So just let's say how many you think that is. 1/3? Okay, good. How many of the audience have ever deactivated their Facebook account? Roughly the same amount of people, right?
Wow.
So did you know, older people, that you can deactivate your Facebook account? The answer is no. Because, and this demonstration is to show that young people have a very good handle on privacy on Facebook. Whereas if you read the newspaper, you would see that actually young people have no idea about privacy, and in fact, there's all these predatory sites, Facebook, Snapchat, et cetera, that are ruining people's lives. But I would posit that actually we are taking our own identity on the internet, our own identity on Facebook, et cetera, and we're saying, well, I don't know how to control this, so obviously no one else does. And I think instead what's happening is younger people who've grown up with this stuff are often seeing that the nuances to how do you control that identity. And when I say young and old, I mean under 25 and over 25, which is depressing for me.
All right, so what does that mean, understanding the generational differences and how they're going to use controls or know about controls? How does that affect your work getting into to retail?
I don't know if it does much. I mean, we have to be, every time you're building something on the internet that people use, you have to be conscious of the data and how that impacts that user. For example, on the campaign, we used to have this thing that we always asked if we were building something, will this or could this be creepy? Because there's a lot of capabilities that you could do. Like we could set up a retail store, put cameras on the front, and then do image tracking and do look who's connected with us on Facebook or friend us on Facebook, and then literally greet you at the door with your name. And we could then do all sorts of very bizarre things from there, and that would be creepy. And so we always said, let's not do that. And so a little bit of this is like you have to choose when and how you use your power. Because we have this real ultimate power, to reference ninjas, of being able to actually do very bizarre things. And I think it's just trying to scale that in and out a little bit and make sure that we don't do the terrible, creepy thing. Now with that said, I always talk about this as we can then train some young people, start with them, they'll train the older people and go up on some of that weird stuff. And so that's kind of, we see a lot of really neat things happening on the internet, and it usually starts with our youth. I first heard about Snapchat a little bit after it was launched when I spoke at a high school. I said, what apps should I be looking at? And they were all like, Snapchat, every one of them. That was like
That's good market research. Yeah, that's smart. Yeah. So did you go in and use it? What was your take on on Snapchat and?
I used it and sent a bunch of crazy photos to my friends, and it was really fun.
Right. And did you believe it was temporary? Did you believe they would disappear?
Yeah,
or
I mean,
do you have the kind of the cynicism that comes to getting older, where you think it doesn't matter what the company says, they are going to exist, they'll be out there. It's vulnerable.
So the first thing I did with Snapchat was I reverse engineered it so I could save the photos, because I wanted to see if you could do it, because I didn't believe that you couldn't do it. You can do it, whatever, that's fine. All that did was ruin for me the magic that Snapchat is. Which was a real bummer, because my usage before I found out that and after is like, my usage before was like this, I found out and it was like, whoosh, no more. And it wasn't so much that I was worried that someone would save a photo, it was that the magic was gone. Because it's kind of like when the NSA stuff came out. There's all these people who've been watching surveillance, government surveillance, and everyone said, well, we should have known. It came out with some earlier stuff that maybe this was happening. We should have expected this. That doesn't mean that when you actually know, it's still a bummer. Like you're still bummed. The magic disappears, and I think that's why it's kind of tricky, right? With that said, Snapchat's still great. I think it's a really interesting platform, and I think it's a really good example of the privacy differences of age. And I think you can easily illustrate it in this very simple way by saying, asking someone, regardless of age, what is the one thing they're going to grab when their house is on fire? Many people who are older than 25, let's say, will still say some photo album or a box of photos. But anyone that's younger than that doesn't have the property of permanence attached to photos. because they have this world of cameras everywhere. Photos are in the cloud. They're all over the place. You can delete them. You can keep them. They're ephemeral. They're not. Whereas me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, those photos. I would never want to lose those. And so there's this balance here, and I think that kind of incommensurability of vocabulary even, where the word photo has a different meaning for age, it leads me to ask, like, what else are we missing? And that's something,
I gotta say, I think permanence has a different meaning there, because you talk about the permanence, there's permanence on the server, and there's permanence of the physical photo. It's like they know that it's there, so that's why they're not worried about it, even though they think of the physical object as temporary. Yeah. I guess one thing I get flummoxed by is that you talk about generational differences with privacy. I think it exists within individuals. I was talking to Troy Carter recently, Lady Gaga's former manager and everything, and fascinating guy, and he was saying he could not believe how hypocritical people were being when they were so upset with U2's album being put on their phone, and that just blew up into this huge backlash.
I mean,
but at the same time,
I understand that.
but at the same time, they basically, where was the uproar when those companies are handing over all the information to the government? And he was saying, that's what makes it so hard to kind of calibrate the reaction to privacy and what to do about it.
I don't know. I think that what happens is we choose, there's a couple interesting threads we could go here, right? There's the whole idea that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? We hear this a lot when we look at startups and whatnot. There's the other side of where I just don't think people care. I just don't think they care. I think they care about things they can see and touch. If you read Twitter after they released that U2 album, people thought their phones were hacked. It was the best thing in the world, actually, if you can go back and check out those tweets. It was really great, because people were just like, I don't know why my phone is hacked. U2 just appeared on my phone.
Right.
If that's your phone getting hacked, then you have a pretty, I guess, very simple life. But it's like that kind of thing, whereas Amazon selling your data, or Apple selling your data, or AT&T working with the NSA, or Verizon working with NSA, you don't see that when you wake up the next day. You're not waking up the next day and say, oh, the NSA is looking at all my correspondence. There's nothing to see. In fact, they've done a very good job of making it so you actually cannot see it. And I think that's one of the big differences. And I do think that there's a disconnect between the amount of upset we've seen about the NSA and about surveillance versus the amount of upset we've seen because iOS 8 has a bug. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine if the NSA changed their terms of service? Everyone would flip out, right? Because it's like, look at what happened with Instagram a couple years ago. People were dying. But last year I had an opportunity, really great opportunity to travel all around the world. The only place anyone cared about the NSA was in Germany, and they're all insane.
Were there different attitudes regarding privacy in different countries?
Yeah, but really, the only place anyone cared was Germany, and that's because they have this cultural and historical identity with data and how it can be really bad.
Right.
And we don't have that, and many other places don't have that. But when you said, okay, who in the room cares about the NSA and surveillance? So everyone's going to raise their hands because that's what they should do. And then it's like, who in the room has gotten rid of AT&T, Verizon, or Facebook? So, good job. And that's what you see, because it's impossible to opt out.
Right.
And so since it's impossible to opt out, I think in a lot of ways we've just given up and we've just said, okay.
So what is the alternative? Instead of opting out, what do you do? If you do want to take some control, other than understanding, again, how to manipulate the controls within Facebook, what are some of the other ways you think we can take more control of our presence and control our privacy?
That's a hard question, because I was just thinking to myself, have I opted out? And I don't think I have either. But I think what we can do is we can talk about it, we can become educated about it, and becoming educated about it is admitting that we are participating in a world where there are bad people trying to do bad things. And so when we admit that, then you say, okay, so maybe surveillance is okay for some cases, but which cases? Mm-hmm. And then it's all about how do we elect leaders and leadership that will help us get that accountability where needed. Mm-hmm. And then it's about how do we make sure that when they get into office that they don't see some secret document that makes them say, okay, maybe we should have this stuff.
Right.
And so it's a lot about, I don't have an answer, and this is something I go over in my head a lot, because obviously I'm a big supporter of Barack Obama and everything he's done, but then I'm just kind of like, but wait, this is very complex, right? We go back to that nuance.
Oh, nuance, yeah. You're delving into the area you're not supposed to cover. What about this idea that to go back to something you said before, look, if you can make it invisible what you're doing with it, in a way, it's okay because people don't know it. So
yeah.
is this basically what companies are trying to do, so
There's-
that whatever manipulation they're doing, whatever data analysis they're doing to invade people's privacy or what have you, as long as it's kind of in the background.
Right, and there's
We're not
that very
upset about it.
famous story of Target, right, where they had
Right.
they were able to tell if women, through modeling, they had a confidence level of women being pregnant by buying certain levels or certain amounts of unscented lotion or something very bizarre. And they were able to send people some marketing material based on this. So they would say, okay, you know, we'd send this person has a 90%, we're 97% confident they're pregnant. We're going to send them this marketing material that's like, you're pregnant, yay, buy some baby stuff. And then they sent it to some young woman, and this woman's dad was like, why are you getting this weird pregnancy stuff? This is inappropriate. Goes to Target and says, you have to stop sending this. And they're like, I'm so sorry. And then like 3 weeks later, the manager of that Target calls up that dad and says, I just want to make sure everything was okay. And he said, well, actually, my daughter was pregnant. She didn't know, and I didn't know. But Target knew through data. So first of all, I'd like to know what else Target knows about me, because I'd like to make some life choices and change things. But the second thing is I don't think Target looked at that and said, oh, we shouldn't use data to market things. They didn't learn like, oh my gosh, suddenly we cannot have this really valuable modeling, we can't use this. I think what they learned instead is they learned we can't have such an overt advertisement. So instead, every time you get one of these like summer mailers where it's like summer grilling, and you see this ad for like Pampers in the middle, you're going to be like, what do they know about me? Because what they did is they hid that modeling inside of their creative instead of having it be out there in front. Where else is this happening? We see those in like future movies. We always see the ads that follow you.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of this stuff is here now. We're just not so aware. And, you know.
So should companies be leading with that technology so that we get there? Or is that the risk of going too far out there before we're ready for it?
I think they are leading with that technology.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I don't know if you guys have ever Googled for some product and then clicked on the product and then not bought it, and then it follows you around the internet.
Yeah.
It's a really good prank to do for friends, by the way, when you use their internet. But be careful. This is a strong power. Use it wisely. But you know, I think people are running with it. I don't think companies are holding back. I think the concern, though, is, and this is what we have to be careful, is I don't think we care. And so I know that I don't really care. I kind of think it's cool when I'm like, oh, I did want to buy that shirt. Thanks for making it easier. But when will it stop? And when will all of a sudden we'll be like, oh, you know, we'll wake up and it'll be terrible.
Right.
So I think we have to be careful. And so next time there's some big thing that happens and you care about it, really stand up. You know, talk about it, tweet about it. I guess, you know, clicktivism. What is that word? That terrible activism through clicking.
Right. No, that's it. All right. I think you just launched a movement right there. Harper, thanks so much for sitting down and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Awesome.